Welcome to Viewpoints. Today with us, we have Eric Parry. I'd like to welcome you, Eric. I've known you. I don't know if you've kept track of our time that we've known each other, but I met Eric in 2007 after I became involved in the National Emergency Number Association. Eric's history to public safety is quite impressive with over 53 years of experience. He is a published author, international consultant, a master in emergency medical call processing models, and remains involved in current issues. He, along with his wife, Jo, have supported me and encouraged me through my career and what I can best describe as, at times, uncomfortable growth. Eric, it's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here talking about uncomfortable growth.
Yes, there have been moments of uncomfortable growth. So I guess I want to start out by talking to you about your law enforcement career and what prompted you to go from that into retirement into where you are today.
Well, it's a long story, but I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version. I started out as a technologist before I joined the Federal Police Organization Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Because of my technical background over my career, which spanned 24 years, I took an interest in anything to do with police communications, which brought me into a position where I was involved with what we called our operational communication centers, which back in those days was pre-911. And that's where all our emergency calls came to. And I don't know, I recognized one of the things that caught my attention was the amount of stress leave and the amount of time off that was occurring in our comm centers. And there was about, 20 of them in the province of British Columbia that I was kind of overseeing to a degree. And I thought it's kind of got me thinking about, why do we have this kind of thing happening in our communication centers? And it was odd to me because some of our centers that had the lowest call volume had the most amount of stress leave. So it got me interested. I started talking to our staffing people, and I discovered that we didn't really have a good hiring practice. We didn't have established standards for the civilian telecommunicators, if I can call them that we were hiring. So we didn't have a job profile established. Therefore, we didn't have solid hiring standards. And that led me to it led me to a discussion with an industrial psychologist that the RCMP that I worked for had in our nation's capital, Dr. Anna Gray. And we got to talking, and we talked about psychometric testing. And I'm talking like the early 90s here. And
Okay.
we talked about psychometric testing. We talked about personality profiling, a whole bunch of things. Anyway, the short version of the story is we revamped our selection and hiring standards for telecommunicators. And that led me to a panel presentation in NENA conference, National Emergency Number Association conference in Montreal in 1993. So I arrived there thinking, I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm sure that others are kind of doing the same thing. And anyway, I get there, and as it turns out, everybody's like, wow, really? You've done you've got selection and hiring standards, and you've got like interviews and things that you do. So that brought me to NENA, and NENA changed my life completely because as a result of some of that work I had done, I was asked to write a book called Managing the 911 Center. There's copies of it on eBay for like $200. So I don't get any of that money, but anyway. So I wrote this book, took me 5 years, and kind of the other volunteer work that I did with NENA, they created an education program, and I was asked to chair the Education Advisory Board, which was a volunteer position. And I think when I started into that, our NENA program back in those days, I think it had 2 courses. It had a puzzle course and a basic 911 or an addressing book. Anyway, one thing led to another. We started to create courses. I retired from the RCMP and started to consult. Nina recommended me to a job in Argentina. There's some folks that had approached Nina. They needed somebody that had some police background with some 911 experience. And before I left the force, I had done a 911 implementation in a small city in central Alberta. So I had this 911 thing that was going on, and so next thing I know, I'm on a plane going to Argentina. And the project went well until the mayor got arrested for fraud and thrown in jail. That was the end of that project.
Oh.
And then another thing happened to me. There was a gentleman named Bill Bailey from Parry Dispatch, which is the the company in Salt Lake City that does the protocols for police, fire, and EMS, EMD. So as I was giving this course, I was actually teaching a course in Florida. He was a student. He stands up and he said, "Yeah, we're doing a comm center in Argentina, looking for somebody with some background. If anybody's, is interested in helping our company implement EMD, let me know." So I went and had a chat with him. Next thing I know, I'm on a plane to Argentina again. And one thing led to another. They in Salt Lake City, they had a need for a police consultant, and my wife and I had just renovated this big house in Canada, and this is going to be our place. Next thing you know, we're in the U-Haul heading to Salt Lake City, and so that's kind of my career has jumped all over the place. And sometimes I'm asked, how did you end up doing this? I mean, this is my 53rd year now in public safety, and the past 20 some odd years have been working not only in the United States as a consultant, but I've gone to Hong Kong and Thailand, Malaysia,
Wow.
England, and I just whenever somebody has come to me and said, "Hey, I need some help with this," or "Do you know anything about that?" I would always say, "Yeah, sure, I'll help," or "Yeah, sure, I'll go to Argentina." So one of the things I make the joke, I just can't say no when I'm asked to do something. So, and that's kind of been the story of my public safety life. Now, having said that, there's been hills and valleys and ups and downs over the years. I think it's important for everybody to know that's listening to me rattle on here is that life does throw, it ain't a bowl of cherries, is that often we get into situations in this profession where it becomes difficult to figure what needs to happen next. And so it is. Right now, I find myself doing consulting for 911 centers for PSAPs that are experiencing problems, and it's sort of it's a great place to arrive at. After I often make the joke, after it only took me 50 some odd years to find the perfect job, but now I'm doing picking and choosing the work I do. Like I said, I'm 72, but I'm still kicking, alive and well, and loving some of this work I'm still doing. And I think it's important, and Sherry, you'll understand this, that it's important that we find a way to give back. And I often make the joke that the reason I'm able to do some of these things I do is because I've made all those mistakes in the past. Back in the day where we weren't sure what we were doing, we thought we were doing the right thing by hiring certain people or giving them certain, tests, whatever. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. My journey took me to Salt Lake City, and as a police communications guy, I didn't know anything about protocol. So when I went to Salt Lake City, I was instrumental in developing police protocol for Parry Dispatch. And so it's been a journey, and I've got my wife who's a great supporter and champion. I drag her to all the conferences. And I can tell you one thing, that if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be doing half of the stuff I'm doing, because she's been my support over the past 23 years. So,
That's very cool to hear. Um,
yeah.
I have your book. I don't know. I was, let's see, that was in the mid 90s, I believe. My chief went to a conference and came back with three books: the GIS book, the 911 puzzle book, and the center management book. He's like, Sherry, read these. These are going to help you. And so I'm like, Eric Perry, where's he work? And I always thought, well, that'd be cool, to do that. And well, that'd be cool to be part of Nina. And um, I love hearing your story, because I'm sure when you were working for the, what is it, Royal Canadian Police, RCP, is that right? Uh,
RCMP, yeah, close enough.
RCMP. Okay. I'm sure you didn't think, hey,
Yeah.
someday I'm going to be traveling all over the world doing
Oh,
911 consulting.
yeah, you're spot on. I mean, I never, when I when I retired from the RCMP, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I had kind of, there's an expression, once you get bitten by the bug, and I had gotten bitten by the bug. Um, and I knew that my journey that took me to that panel in Montreal in 1993, that panel discussion on selection and hiring, it sort of was an eye opener for me, because I soon, well, number one, I was rubbing shoulders with some awesome people. That was one of the big things that really hit me right between the eyes at that conference, is the great people, the Bob Cobbs of the world, and
Yeah.
some of the other folks, the Sharon Countermans of the world, who were just like, we were so like-minded. And one of the things that really grabbed me was that there's this mountain of work that needs to be done to make this profession better. And I thought, boy, if there's any one little thing I can do to help with that, then like I said, it's taught me over the years that it's really important to get engaged if you're in this profession, to figure a way that you can give back, whether it's joining Nina or APCO, or learning more about what's out there in terms of the standards and things like that, because we do have some distance to go. I don't think it's any secret that we have a staffing crisis right now in 911,
Right.
and and I've been at this a long time, and I think we're just starting in the profession to figure out what needs to be done or what we're doing wrong. We're just beginning to put our arms around wellness. We have probably one of the bigger problems that's been, in my opinion anyway, that's been staring us in the face, is this whole PTSD that goes on, that often goes unrecognized in that our culture, in our 911 emergency communication center culture. We just haven't done that well, and I think that's part of why people come and go in this profession. And I think with the help of, like the Michelle Lillies of the world, that we're beginning to find out what's going on. And there's a whole new movement now with regard to wellness that's long overdue. I mean, we've talked about it, but we've never really dug in and got serious about it.
Right.
So,
I agree. Um, One of the reasons that I thought it'd be fun to have you on the show is when I work with new dispatchers. Uh, One of the common terms that has always driven me crazy was, well, I'm just a dispatcher. If you want to talk to an officer, and I'm like, no, I kind of freak out a little bit. You're not just a dispatcher. You are a dispatcher. And I always try and tell them there's so much more to this career, this profession, than dispatching. So when people say, well, this is a dead end job, um, and and I know that you have a lot of those experiences. That's why I was really happy that you agreed to be on with us. Um,
well,
but you
I
did,
have very strong opinions about that.
yes.
Um,
I'd like to hear
Sorry, I
them.
didn't mean to talk over you, but I have very strong opinions. I have very strong opinions about that. And one of the things I can say is law enforcement has done a horrible job of managing 911. And it's only since, pardon me, it's only since we've had you know, communications centers, PSAPs, call them what you will, moved out from under law enforcement, that things are starting to change. We need to be able to give our call takers and dispatchers the tools they need to do the work properly. We need to have them trained properly. We have to have them, we have to have solid quality assurance programs in place that can look at how we can be better. Traditionally, back in my day, the only time you reviewed a call is when something went horribly wrong,
Right.
and back then we were winging it. You know, I can remember, like, there's the phone, there's the radio, and it was like an old fashioned phone. There's the phone, there's the radio. When the phone rings, you answer it. There's a typewriter, type up the call. That was it. Okay, and so that's that. I'm talking in extremes here to make my point, but that's how it was back in the 70s. Um, it's changed a lot. We've certainly got all kinds of technology now that's helping us, but it's still the person who answers that call that's sitting in a comm center somewhere. This is much more than historically what law enforcement has tended to look at insofar as that kind of work goes. So we're way beyond the time when we need to be having proper training, the proper tools, the proper technology, people that are trained to be fast thinkers and critical thinkers and be thinking ahead. Those are all things that we're now just starting to kind of understand and put into place. Like I said, I came to Salt Lake City. I didn't know what protocol. I had a vague idea what protocol was, but I was tasked with uh, trying to develop some kind of system for 911 that did a better job of triaging police calls. And I tell you, that was the biggest challenge of my life, trying to figure that out. It took me 2 years to even understand what had to be done before we could move forward and actually do it. So, and so I guess where I'm going in all of this is that we still have things that we have to deal with and figure out in this whole profession, and it's through organizations like NINA, and APCO and the Academy that that we're doing a better job. We didn't have ENP certification when I first got mixed up with NINA. It came along a few years after that. Now this ENP, emergency number professional certification, has become a very important thing in terms of being able to credential a public safety professional. NINA has also, opened up their membership to telecommunicators or to dispatch, whatever we're calling them these days. And that now we have people in PSAPs that are in ECCs that are aspiring to become ENPs. And this is my last year on the NINA Institute board. That's where you and I met.
Right.
And it's time for me to step aside, let somebody else, somebody younger with, better ideas than me, to jump into those shoes. And but we got to keep this train going. We really do.
You talked about Nina changing the course of your life. I would say the same, but the Nina Institute board, I don't think people really understand that certification yet. I think it's getting there. But I have to say, getting my ENP, that opened up my eyes and so many doors. And I tell new dispatchers that all the time. There's a certification that you can take that's recognized internationally. It's such a big piece of what we can, aspire to now.
Yeah, and having been with the program since its inception, I'm one of the few old timers still that have been involved with that whole NINA Institute board and the ENP process development over the years. I I must admit that sitting around that group of in those meetings around that group of people, the combined number one, the combined years of experience, let alone the knowledge, can be quite overwhelming to the new ones that come along. But it's a personal choice to get your ENP. Often people say, "Well, why should I get this? You know, what am I going to get out of it? Am I going to get more money? Am I going to get what's in it for me? And I turn that around. I say, well, it's not about what's in it for you. It's what's in it for the profession. You know,
Right.
it becomes a personal choice. It's something that you make a decision to aspire to and that you should pursue. And I think we need to, that's one of the ways that we need to change the thinking of the way people think, or have been, trained to think or forced to think, is that, this, there's a huge opportunity out there to get involved with organizations like APCO and NINA. And that's where I started. I started on a panel and not knowing anybody or not sure what the heck I was talking about. And it just kind of went from there. It just went from there. It just, things started to happen. It's some of the choices I made, things started to fall into place. Um, and it's something I would encourage anybody that is listening to my rant here to give serious consideration to getting involved with NINA, there's state chapters, there's in Canada, there's a couple of NINA chapters, or get involved with APCO. There's APCO chapters all over the place. APCO Canada is another, if there's any Canadians listening to this. I'm a Canadian, by the way, but I got naturalized, so I have dual citizenship, so I can talk out of both sides of my mouth about things.
A. um, I want to go back to for a minute to the protocols. Uh, it seems like EMD is more accepted than the police protocols. What I've heard from many police chiefs and upper management in police departments is we don't want the dispatchers to be bogged down with questions like that. And so, regardless of the protocol system that's being used, it's really met with some resistance. Now, you started in law enforcement. How do you think you would have felt if you can put yourself back in those law enforcement shoes? How do you think you would have felt now? And how do you, I mean, you developed the curriculum, or the protocols for the agency in Salt Lake City, but do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. So
Okay.
way back in, this would have been around 1977 or 78, probably before you were born, Sherry. I was
That's
sitting there at
sweet.
my desk thinking, I was sitting at my desk as a young constable, thinking, knowing what I was hearing, what I was hearing as we started to listen to and review calls. I thought there has to be a better way because it was just hit and miss, and it was kind of people flying by the seats of their pants. And I actually developed a very rudimentary kind of flow chart, which I thought was a terrific idea, but didn't go anywhere at the time because nobody was really interested in it. But I knew that it was all tied into the bigger picture, and I knew that someday that as I progressed through my career, and as the world changed, I had heard about the medical protocols, and that's kind of what got me. I had gone to a conference, and I'd come back with a little floppy diskette of an early version of a medical protocol. And I thought it would be pretty cool if we had this for police, but we really don't need it because, police calls are quite different from medical and fire. So fast forward 20 years late, 20 some odd years later, I'm sitting there scratching my head trying to figure out how we could come up with a different system, a better system for police call taking. And over the years, it's been quite a journey. I think law enforcement continues to be fairly resistive to that idea, but I have to say that the police protocol system that I helped develop way back is now catching on, and it's a very progressive and big and small PSAP zone, both in Canada and the United States. And you can argue it every which way you want, but at the bottom line, what I had to learn over the years is how is a police call different than a medical or a fire call? And it took me a while to figure that out because as I'm sitting there at my desk in Salt Lake City with guys like Jeff Clausen coming in and saying, "Hey, how come we're not selling more of this police protocol? What's wrong with you? How come it's not? How come nobody is catching on and la la la?" And I was sitting there feeling quite, how the heck am I going to figure this shit out? So as time went on, we developed a very rudimentary and early version of the protocol. We developed software for it. It wasn't until we had the software developed that it became feasible, because police calls are almost diametrically opposite to fire and medical call. Fire and medical calls are usually go now calls, and they're very predictable. Some would argue that, but they're fairly predictable. It's a fire. It's somebody that's going to get worse, get better, or stay the same. And it's much easier to get our heads around a protocol system for those types of calls. Whereas police, it's like, are you kidding me? No, that'll never work. But in actual fact, it does work. And we, over the years, in fact, they just released version 7. And by the way, I still teach the protocol. They just came out with version 7 of the police protocol, which is very fast, slick, and actually is probably the best system that's out there right now. Of course, I'm biased, but I still remain on the Police Council of Standards. But you can argue this every which way you want. Bottom line is, there's certain things you got to do on every call. There's certain questions that you must ask on every call, and depending on what type of call it is and where it takes you, then your protocol becomes your safety net. That's the best way I can say it. When you're brand new and you don't have like the 20 some odd years and sitting there in the center, and you suddenly have a child abduction or an active assailant, an active shooter, you better know what to do. And that's where the protocol, you can go to that right away, and that becomes your safety net. So I went from a skeptic to a full supporter and ambassador for a protocol system. And you don't have to use the priority dispatch system. There's other ones out there. I always say something's better than nothing. But you do, and then you can argue it again. You can say, okay, show me a question in this protocol that you wouldn't ask. And people look at it and say, well, no, we'd ask every one of those. And I go, well, there you go. So what this does is it makes sure that you ask those. And it makes sure that if it's an urgent call, that you dispatch right away. If it's one that is a cold call, then you can take your time with that. And the other thing, just to kind of close the loop on this discussion, is that I mentioned earlier that most fire and ambulance or police or medical calls are go now calls. The vast majority of them are go now calls. Police calls are kind of the opposite. We have very few police calls. Anecdotally, you think, oh yeah, every police call is like lights and siren. It isn't. Most of police calls are cold calls. They're things that have happened in the past. They're things that don't require a full interrogation, and they're not go now calls. And that, when I had that revelation back in Salt Lake in 2002 or 3 or 4, whenever it was, that kind of changed everything. And then the other thing I got to mention too is that there was one little 911 center in the middle of nowhere, southern Alberta, that decided they were going to take that protocol and beat the crap out of it and make it work. And if it wasn't for them being the gutsy ones to take the first step at a protocol that hadn't been tested or really beaten up much by the industry, and they changed everything. They changed the direction of everything. And it was just one or two people that believed, that thought it was, this just might work. Let's try and make it work. And that changed everything. Medicine Hat, Alberta. Jackie Fox.
I really want to point that out to our listeners. How often do we get bogged down with thinking, well, I'm just one person, I can't really make a difference. And I can't speak for anything else, because public safety is all I've known all my life. But one person really can change the course in public safety.
And I didn't go at it. It really, this might sound really cliche, but I just saw these things that I thought somebody needed to figure out, and nobody appeared to be figuring it out. At least I didn't know anybody that was figuring it out. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm not the I'm by no means Albert Einstein, but there were things that clearly weren't making sense that I thought, oh, I'm going to see if I can just, ask a few questions and get some help. And it's like the other thing I think it's important. It's not all about you. It's not all about me. The things that I've done over the years, I could never have done them by myself. There's always other people that have been helping me or coaching me, or that I've, drawn in, picking their brains. Uh, it's like anything else. It's never one person. It's kind of like, if I can talk about Wayne Gretzky, who's a renowned hockey player. He was kind of touted as the great one. But when you look at Wayne Gretzky or any other sports hero or anybody that's, achieved something, they've never done it by themselves.
Right.
Gretzky wasn't one hockey player on a hockey team. There were 15 other guys there and a coach and a whole thing that were making him, or that were enabling him to be the champion he was. And I by no means drawing that analogy to myself, but the one thing is important, that if you believe in something or you have an idea, to try and pursue it, but you're going to need help doing it, and don't be afraid to ask for that help. I said earlier, if the day I called my wife and said, "Hey, I'm being offered this job in Salt Lake City. We just renovated a house. We'd only been married a few months. In order to take that job, we got to move to Salt Lake City." She says, "All right, let's move to
Wow.
Salt Lake City." And then
Yeah, you have
next
to
thing you
be
know, I'm driving a
surrounded.
U-Haul across Idaho with the wind blowing the U, trying to keep the U-Haul in the middle of January, trying to keep the U-Haul on the road heading south to Salt Lake City.
Oh, that's when you
Yeah.
moved in January. Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
January
you
2002 was like 2 weeks before the Winter Olympics.
oh, huh. I I just, you've said it a couple times. You really do have to surround yourself by like-minded people who are, I know that's really cliche. I understand, but
Yeah,
you have to surround yourself with people who are where you want to be or going where you want to go. And um, how often do we get down in the wrong path? You know, not following
yeah.
where we should.
Well, I'll tell you. You just reminded me of a couple things there. It's funny, but when I first I talked a moment ago about Medicine Hat and how they took the protocol and made something out of it. It was interesting because my first visit there, they almost ran me out of town because there were people in the center that were violently opposed to the idea. And then it was like some switch got flipped. Took a month. It took a few months, but it was like some switch got flipped, and all of a sudden, those people that were pushing back the hardest suddenly became the champions. And and so that taught me a valuable life lesson, and that is, it's okay to stick what you to what you believe in, because not everybody's going to agree with you, but someday they may change and suddenly agree with you, which is a really interesting thing of human nature that does happen. And so that's happened many times over the years, where people will see something and they'll say, that's not for that'll never work here. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, maybe we should give that a try. So,
Yeah, stay the course. Uh, so I'm
yeah,
going to ask you two questions. What was your biggest challenge that that you feel like you can talk about in your career?
challenge. Well, there's been a few. Um, I guess work wise, the biggest challenge was trying to figure out the protocol. That was a biggie because I couldn't phone a friend. I was up against something that nobody else had done. At least I couldn't find anybody that had done it. And so I had to figure a way through that. And that was, again, I without a lie, I sat for 2 years, almost reaching the point where I didn't think a police protocol was going to work ever, anywhere. And so I don't know, by fate or whatever, or by just me not having the brains to give up. I just kept at it, and then I ran into certain people that were instrumental in, you know, helping me through that, and it continues today actually, because we're still developing that protocol, still evolving, it's still changing, it's still getting better. I had a call yesterday on police council of standards call where we're noodling through, how can we make this better? A couple things that, and the more users you get, and the younger ones that get involved have the great ideas, and so that's why some stage of the game, the curmudgeons like me got to step aside and let the new blood come in and further, figure things out. Okay, so that was. I think there's probably two difficult things. One was um, the challenge of developing a protocol. Probably the second most difficult thing for me was getting fired by the state of Utah after I was the 911 program manager there for 5 years.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like I said earlier, there ain't no easy road here. That the typical career goes in fits and starts. There's some fairly significant hills and mountains and valleys to cross, but at the end of the day, you just gotta keep doing what you believe in and what you enjoy. I think that's a big thing. Is I always those people that know me or work with me, I like to have fun. I'm always coming out with some absurd statements just to get people thinking. And yeah, so I'm still at it, still trying to figure stuff out, still trying to help the profession move forward.
I want to, I don't, you don't have to talk about what happened in Utah, but I guess I'd just like to highlight the fact that sometimes when we um, lose our way or people lose our way for us and we lose a job or have significant discipline, sometimes that just knocks the people right off their feet and they're like, I'm done with this. But you just stayed the course, you just shifted a little. I think that's really admirable.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing I've come to learn over the years is that when you're right. And if you know you're right, and if you know you're doing the right thing, then you have to stick to that. Because often I know I'm right. And when I know I'm right, I'm right. And I, and
Right.
and that really gets that will get you a long way if you stick to your guns. You may be hearing bad things from people. We're famous. I've run into a lot of professional jealousy, if you understand what I mean by that,
I do.
over the years. Where people are jealous of you for, they'll look at you in a way that's not flattering because what you're doing is bothering them, or it's rubbing them the wrong way, or it's against what they believe or whatever.
Right.
So be it. That's going to happen. I got heavily criticized for the book, for managing the 911 center book, from my own colleagues.
Well, it was
You
a
don't
good
know. What do
book.
you know about a book? Right. Yeah. I don't know. And one of the curious things, that book keeps coming back to haunt me. I was just in Clearwater at the NINA Standards and Best Practices Conference, and this young guy that I met. He's actually part of the Education Advisory Board. Young guy. He had the book. He brought it to Clearwater. He said, "I want you to sign this," and so I signed it. But the other thing, that's the curiosity that's come out of that book, is that people who read it, they say, I can hear you talking to me. I can hear your voice in those words. And I thought, really? That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Where people read a book and they hear my voice. That's not too many people can claim that one, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Um, so, okay, so we went over your challenges. What would be your biggest celebrations?
Well, I got I got two fairly prestigious awards. I guess you could say those were celebrations. In 2009, I got the Nina Bill Stanton Award. I think
That's
there's
a
only been
biggie.
about 15 or 16 of those handed out over the years. And then in 2017, I got the Jeff Clausen Leadership Award. So
Wow.
those are, if we're talking celebrations, I think that's what you asked. That would be two.
The Bill Stanton award, can you explain for our viewers what that is?
Well, it's an award that's given out by NENA, National Emergency Number Association, and it's for members of NENA that have made significant contributions to things over the years. And I guess I was being recognized for my work with the education program for developing, taking technology courses like wireless 911 and making a feeble attempt to put together a course that would help people understand that. That's just one example. The book and my involvement with the Institute board. There's a bunch of things I think that led up to that, but it's people that nominate, members of the organization that perhaps have gone a little bit above and beyond, and with Clausen, with the Jeff Clausen Award, it was clearly because of my refusing to give up on the police protocol.
Yeah.
I don't give up easily.
That's benefited thousands of people across the world, probably more than thousands. So we're
Well, it's funny,
appreciative.
because I never think of it like that, and and somebody mentioned to me, I don't know when it was, in the past year somewhere, that they said, yeah, that thing you've done, that's made a big difference probably, and I hadn't really stopped to think about it, but I do remember me sitting down with Jeff Clausen, who's the father of emergency medical dispatch, and I said the same thing to him. This would have been about 5 years ago. I said, Jeff, do you ever stop and think about the impact that your harebrained idea had on the saving of lives and the betterment of what we do? I mean, that thing of his, it's in, like, I don't know how many countries and how many languages. I mean, it's used all over the world. And it was
Right.
just a kind of like an idea he had, if you ever hear him tell the story. But it was the same kind of thing. I said to him, do you ever think about that? And he kind of gave me this look like, not really. So,
Right.
human nature is a funny thing, isn't it?
It is. It is. If I remember that story, he wrote his first protocol idea out on a napkin.
Yeah, to hear him tell the story, he was doing an internship or whatever you call it when you're resident. What is it when you're just young, starting out as a
I think
doctor?
that's
Anyway,
an
he was in
intern.
emergency, an intern, yeah, and he was working for this old doctor in an ER, in the ER in Salt Lake City, and and he was freaking out because this old doctor seemed to know what he was doing. All these patients coming in, and Jeff went to this old guy and said, Doc, I don't know how you do this. All these different things coming in. I don't know how you keep them all straight, know what to do. And this old doctor turned to him and said, son, what you need is a protocol. And this old guy hauled out recipe cards. And so, as time marched on, and Jeff, so the story goes, got a job on an ambulance service in Salt Lake City and tearing around, going to calls, medical calls. And these people were kind of like not getting the help they need after they had called for the ambulance, kind of thing. And so that's what prompted him to do the same thing. So he actually has he showed them to me. He's got recipe cards that's got his initial protocol on it.
Wow, he kept them.
Yeah.
That's
So you got to
crazy.
start somewhere. So he shamed me into making that damn police protocol. I did do it on recipe cards, but
Well, so you've given me examples of your own um, contribution specifically to 911 to PSAPs, but one person, and you've made a huge difference in many, many people's lives. And then you gave me the example of Dr. Clausen doing the same. And so for our viewers, I really want to point out that you are one person. You surround yourself with the right people. You can make huge differences in something that you believe in, that you're passionate about. So, Eric, do you have any parting words for our audience? Anything else you can think of? Any teachable moment, thought? Um,
any pearls of wisdom?
any pearls of wisdom? Yeah.
Well, go after what you believe in. And as we stay in Canada, or as we say in Canada, keep your stick on the ice and you'll do fine.
Oh, hockey. All right. Thanks so much for joining us today, Eric. And you have a wonderful day. I hope to
Thank
see you
you.
in person soon.
Thank you. Been a pleasure.